morning, everybody. Running a little technical and behind. But yeah, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I'm Coach Kerr with the Elvis Cully Fight Team here doing another awesome broadcast with the Fight House Talks podcast. My guest today is Guro, Court Bolton. He's a Pekiti Tirsia instructor, and I'm going to let him say who he is because he's much better at explaining who he is than I am because he just is. So here we are. Brother Court, what you got for us, sir?
How you doing today, Coach? How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good. I am, so a little bit of who I am. I've been a martial artist studying this my whole life. Like you said, Guro and Pekiti Tirsia under Tuan Mel. And just doing whatever I can do.
Awesome. I mean, I did put a long list of your accolades. If anybody wants to see that, it's actually in the show notes. But yeah, like many other martial artists who's been at this as a lifelong pursuit, you've been out there and you've done some stuff. Some other notables, you're involved with law enforcement, and also you're a military veteran, a military combat veteran as well, correct? Am I correct?
Multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan to the military, yes. I am a law enforcement canine handler. Just got done certifying my dual purpose dog again just a couple weeks ago.
Nice.
So actively doing the stuff, not just talking about it or letting it be hypothetical.
You're living the life. And the fact is, and that's a big, we were kind of talking about this earlier, just without actually putting a name to it, is that there's a difference between the hobbyist and the people who live the life. Because the people who live the life, I mean, that's your combat professionals, that's your military, your law enforcement, your contractors, and then there's like a subcategory of living the life. That's your full-time coaches, people who own gyms, train fighters, train, and just teach for a living. And then there's the rest of us, which is fine, because the fact is, this is a hard life. Having been a coach, having been a professional martial artist, this is a really hard life. So living the life, for those who do, it's a honorable profession, and it takes a special kind of person to actually have the longevity in this life. So my hat's off to you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, to jump off on this, you approached me with a really interesting question the other day, and I figured that this would be actually a fun little discussion to talk about. So let's just jump in, because the community knows who you are. I mean, we can go more into it as it comes in, but the fact is, I really want to jump into this question because it is really interesting. So, you remember the question?
I do.
All right.
I do.
Let's throw it up. I reworded it a little bit, but yeah.
Perfect.
What do we got?
Why don't we, as combat scientists, refuse to investigate what realistic defensive scenarios look like in our region of the world?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's dive into a little bit about that. So aside from the titles, our region of the world. So for the scope of a lot of martial artists, obviously it is particular to like their immediate environment within like the 5-10 miles. And looking at the larger regionality of martial arts, it's typically North America. So there's various concerns as to where you live in, because I practice and teach martial arts in Homer, Alaska is way different than I did in Southern California and Los Angeles versus when I did when I was in Texas versus way other places. And it's the same with many other people. When you live in like New York or Ohio, I mean, you do different things because you have a different scope of reality. Is that fair to say?
It is in a broad spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're missing a little bit of the details whenever we look at it like that, because I think it's a lot more similar than it is different in all of these regions.
Okay.
Would you like me to go into that a little bit?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, let's see. Number one, we don't get to walk around with a weapon in our hands.
No.
Okay. Knife, gun, stick. We don't get to walk around with it.
No.
Closest thing I suppose that we could walk around with would be like a walking stick, a cane, something like that.
Yep.
Okay. So that's number one. Number two, the overwhelming majority of every scenario that will come up for a multitude of reasons is going to be an ambush.
Yep.
That we're going to have to survive before we can actually deal with the situation, whatever it may be. We first must survive the ambush.
Yes.
Okay. Then, third thing is we must, in order to stay out of trouble, continue living our lives, all of that, not be prosecuted and dealt with as a criminal, we must deal with the law. We must follow the law.
Yep.
Okay? Those three things being stated, what that means is I have to deal with whatever comes. I can only use equal or lesser force to deal with the situation.
Yep.
And it is the specifics of that moment as to what equal force looks like. For instance, if someone has a weapon and I disarm them, well, now I can't disarm them and then go to my weapon, whatever it is.
Yep.
Because now I become the aggressor, and all of that shifts over to me now.
Yep. In proportionate response. Yep.
Has to be. So these are some of the things that I was thinking of when we look at training, whatever form of combat we look at training. When we look at it, are we looking at it and viewing it from the lens of how do I survive a real scenario?
Right.
Or are we looking at it from this is the technique to study today, the weapon that we're going to explore, the whatever else for the sake of training the art? Which, if that's what we're doing, great, outstanding. There's absolutely a reason for that as well. But it is not, exploring the art is not synonymous with surviving a realistic encounter.
That is correct. I agree.
So that was kind of where I was going with the question. And one of the things that I've really been looking at in my training and in my teaching.
And this is where I get in trouble, even though, because I mean, it's intentionally antagonistic, but there's a hint of truth behind it because I'm incredibly sarcastic. Is that if I'm using FMA in warfare, I'm already wrong. Specifically, edged weapons, singular duel. This is the presentation of FMA in popular social media. Is if I'm doing a knife duel, if I'm immediately going to that blade in an offensive, specific standpoint, I've already failed because one, I'm not using the TTPs and SOPs of having a fire team, using my battle buddy, using combined form. I've already lost the engagement and distance. It's all those things. But when I use that hot button term of like if I'm using FMA in warfare, I already failed. Like I said, I do that on purpose because I want people to think about it. Because the exploration of the art, when I train the knife in a clearly flowing fashion, that's not combat for me. That's history, that's art, that's flow, that's beauty, that's exploration. It's not how I train how to deal with reaction to contact and in a combat environment. It's two different skill sets. So is that like what you're thinking here as well?
Well, I would first of all take umbrage with the statement that if I'm using FMA to deal with the situation, I've already failed, because that is under the presumption that FMA is limited to a specific set of weapons, whatever those are.
Yes.
And my position with that is we have Doompog for a reason in the Pekiti Tirsia world. And I'm gonna talk about Pekiti Tirsia and Illustrissimo Bahadzubu. Simply because when I talk about Filipino, that's the only two that I have any history with or any knowledge of. So when I speak about it, that's the only ones that I can talk about with any form of understanding or knowledge.
Totally fair. I appreciate that distinction. Thank you.
We have Doompog in Pekiti. We do. And we need to understand what it means, what it is, how to use it, where it fits in the force continuum, all of those things. And I would submit to everybody that perhaps we spend too much time working on the weapon and how the weapon flows in this cadenza or in this sequence or whatever else, and not enough time in. If we train one weapon, we train everything, and this is how double sticks trains us to use our hands in these situations, and why double sticks are so important. And stick and knife relates this way, or spadi daga, whichever you want to call it. Single knife here, double knife there, whatever. They all relate back to anything that I want them to relate to, whether it is empty hands. I can show anyone how the Malaya Sabat can be empty hands. It can be a rifle. It can be a piece of pipe that I pick up off the ground. But we have to understand that in order for us to be able to translate it, and that kind of like something I've said to you before, that falls on us as the instructors, as the educated ones, to present to everybody of what makes our systems so special.
Yep, I agree. And it sounds like this is a discussion about tactics and principles versus chasing techniques. Another way to say it is we're chasing outcomes rather than drills, that kind of thing. Is that kind of align with your thought process here?
I think maybe another way to say that would be chasing techniques versus chasing understanding of application.
Okay, that works too.
If I can do the 3 set, which is more important, me to be able to do the 3 sets of Hampak Paniko, Pokol Paniko, Labo Paniko, Kamutsawali, whatever, in Pekiti Tirsia, and be able to demonstrate those with perfect form and fluidity? Or is it more important for me to be able to take the concepts associated in those various sets and demonstrate those in a free-flowing combative aspect to deal with it with a situation? Well, I would submit to you that the reason we learn the sets is to understand the different possibilities of combination, to then be able to present it in the combative form, which is the way it's intended.
Yeah, so target availability and that ability to like connect the dots based on, it's not the techniques, it's the positional alignment and target availability, and having that combative creativity to fall along with the flow. I'm following the line here with NSI with what Dr. Kelly says often is positional alignment and target availability.
I would submit to you that if you can control range, you can control timing. You're gonna go a long ways towards controlling the situation.
Combat space. Yeah, it's combat space management.
Well, we have to first clearly define what the ranges are to understand what I'm trying to control.
Agreed.
And not many places do a very good job of that.
Yeah. If I'm using a knife 20 feet away, I'm not using the correct tool.
But what's the difference in long range and medium range?
That's a good question. From my understanding and definition.
Or here's a fun one. If I submit to you that the footwork and the movement in long range and in close range are almost exactly the same, while the footwork and movement in medium range is the odd one out and must be practiced separate than long range or close range.
I agree. I can agree with that one, especially with my background in boxing. I can definitely agree with that one. I move very similar in long and in close, very different in short and medium range.
And so how do we define what long range, medium range, and close range is?
Okay. And it's not a measurement of distance because distance varies based upon the people and the tools and the environment. So what do you think should be those definitions?
What if I said in long range, I can reach your hand or your forearm?
Okay.
And in medium range, I can hit your body and your head.
Okay.
And in close range, I can trap, elbow, knee. And then if you wanted to take it one step further and go to close range, that's where I get into the grappling, whether standing or on the ground.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah.
And that's irregardless of weapons size of the individual, whatever. Those ranges still pretty much hold true.
Yeah. Yep. I can agree with that.
So, I mean, yeah, that's where the other part of it is, as we look at this, along with the statement that we're going to have to survive an ambush. The ambush is going to start in that close range. It's not going to start in long range. It's going to start in close range. We're going to have to create the room, the space, the time to then be able to do whatever it is we're trying to do.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense.
Which is completely opposite from the way 90% or more of the population train these different systems, where we train it from long range in, when the reality of what the situation is going to look like is close range out.
Yeah. Because you have to survive the initial contact. Because the fact is, if you don't survive the initial contact, you don't survive the fight. So, because he or she who dictates pace or takes the initiative in the combat space typically can win the fight. Because action is faster than reaction. You're changing pace and tempo. I mean, it's the whole litany of fighting principles that are universal across the board. So
pace, range, and timing dictate everything.
Yes, sir. I agree.
So that's where we have to understand these things, and we have to be familiar and comfortable in it. From boxing standpoint, we would look at how much time we spend training, coaching, working in the pocket.
Yep.
From a boxing standpoint.
It's my favorite place to play.
Right. Yep. Who plays in the pocket in Filipino martial arts, in just about any other system? Who plays in the pocket?
Balintawak sure does, because we're forced to be there, because it doesn't work at long range.
I would almost question, is Balintawak in medium range or is it in close range?
I mean, it can't. I mean, by your definition, it's medium range, but it's supposed to be at close to medium range. It just depends upon the grouping system. Now, bear in mind, everybody, I am very, very, very new to Balintawak, but my understanding and observation with Balintawak after like 30 years of martial arts, it's just like I can see him play and actually putting hands on. It seems very forced to be there, because a problem that I run into with Balintawak, and this is why it's taking me the time that it's taken me to learn Balintawak, is the fact is I've tried to blend other stuff, and being forced to fight in the pocket or play in the pocket, because Balintawak's not a fight, it's play. If I'm being forced to play in the pocket, I have a real hard time, because I want to branch out. I want to angle out. I want to play at that long range and hit with the tip of the stick. I want to close distance and grapple. But the Balintawak grouping system, specifically like with the Tabuada Balintawak system, is very forced. You have a specific cadence and protocol to follow, which is great for training, but it's really, really hard not to blend stuff. And that's
why do you want to change the range?
Me? Because I don't want to sit. I don't want to sit there and bang. I want to sit there and I want to win the engagement. And this is where that psychology of like trying to determine what I'm doing there. Because one, as GM Bobby puts it, Balintawak isn't fighting; it's play. So getting outside that mindset of like I'm trying to fight. No, I'm not trying to fight in Balintawak. I'm playing with my partner. But there was that little shift in my mind of like I'm in here doing combative things. And if I'm speeding up and I feel like I'm losing, then I want to dominate the space. That's inherent to my combat sports background. If I feel like I am losing ground in that space, I'm going to change the angle and reassess and take control of that space. But Balintawak's not about that. So that's my problems. Now, I could be completely wrong, and all my guros in Tabuada Balintawak will say will tell me where I'm wrong, but I appreciate that fact. But the fact of the matter is, from my exposure with the things that I do already, that's what it feels like. So I could be wrong though.
I would submit two things.
Yes, sir.
Number one, we don't have a fight. There is no fight until it gets to medium range.
Agreed.
Period. Number two, the reason we try to angle out or move or change the range is in an attempt to change the timing.
Yep, I agree.
from my extremely limited exposure to GM Bobby and his version of Balintawak, what I see that makes him so special at Balintawak and what he does is his ability to change the timing without changing the relationship.
That is correct. He is he's a genius. I'm just going to put it that way. Fanboying or not, the man is a genius. So physical and intellectual genius. So, and he's a phenomenal singer. So
I'll take your word for that.
And video.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Okay. Then perhaps fitting right along in this, changing the timing fits in whatever system we're doing, whether it's Balintawak or it's Pekiti Tirsia or it's Illustrissimo, Bahadzubu, or it's Western boxing or it's fill in the blank. Changing the timing fits. Changing the range, most commonly that's just an attempt to change the timing or to escape a pace. That's been my experience. Is that's the reason we want to change the range or change the angle, is because we're trying to escape timing or change the timing or escape a pace that's being put on us.
Because if you're being overwhelmed, because your brain and your body can only track so much data coming in, especially touch points, and if you're being overwhelmed, you have to disconnect to reassess and reprocess. So if there's so much speed and impact, you do have to exit that space so you can actually catch up and then implement your approach. So because, like, point in case, I'm posting old fight video from my old fight team. And my last boxing match was my greatest loss ever because I had a great time on it. But the fact of the matter is, I was losing that fight the entire time because I couldn't figure out my pacing, my timing, my distance. My opponent, he rushed across the ring, didn't allow me to get into my pace in my pocket, and was just pummeling the entire time. It was 5 rounds of just getting high speed, 2 cats in a bag, just smashing the crap out of each other. It was a brawl the entire time. There was no boxing. It was just straight up brawling. And I could not figure out the timing and spacing because I had so much like contact coming in that I could not catch. So I was trying to angle out the entire time and was failing miserably. So because his pace was outlasting mine or was dictating mine. So.
And I think to bring all this back to the original question that was formulated for this is, why do we not look at the realistic scenarios when we're doing the training? And my suggestion is the reason we don't look at the realistic scenarios and we train the way we do is because of comfort, of ease, of familiarity.
Yep, and there's a bit of romanticism in there as well. So, but yeah.
So, you know, as you are so quick to state, there is a specific perception of all Filipino martial arts that is being portrayed across social media everywhere these days. And you know, if that perception is not the one that we want, perhaps it's up to us to figure out how to change it.
Agreed, because like there's 2 camps that I see often on social media. There is the combat prison system approach, which is skilled violence, ambushing, actual warfare, and then there's traditional cultural approach that's flavored with FMA. So, and I could be wrong, but that's what I see constantly. You have killing systems and historical cultural practices. So how do we marry it in between? That is a big question.
And looking at the combative systems, and okay, I know if you want to look at Medusa, I'm number 13 instructor in Medusa all these different things. Okay.
Yep.
The concepts I find very similar. We either train for dueling or we train for or we train to deal with ambushes.
Yep.
And very rarely are we actually training with dealing with ambushes. Almost always, well, we're always training to either duel or to be the aggressor, ambushing someone else. Excuse me, I misspoke. That's the two standard ways that we train.
Agreed. Yep, I agree.
Neither of those is a realistic scenario for an actual defensive encounter.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I submit to. Oh, go ahead.
Being the aggressor in things fits perfectly if you're in the military, if you're law enforcement serving a warrant, if you're a prisoner and you're attacking someone trying to take them off the yard. Great, no problem. But if you're not a criminal and you're not in those other positions, well, then you have to deal with things differently than they do.
Yep, that's correct.
So that's kind of the mindset behind where I was coming from with this question.
Yep.
Of why do we refuse to look at this? Because what I see is well, if we're being completely honest, so often what I see is people who are very skilled at some system of martial arts, but have very little realistic real world experience using it.
Yeah, I agreed. Yep.
So that makes it difficult to relate the techniques that they're so skilled at to the specific environment that they're trying to train for.
Agreed. How can you act like a criminal if you've not done criminal stuff? So there's that mentality. How do you can intellectually understand things, but there is a significant difference between intellectual intelligence versus experiential intelligence. And the other part that I add to that is chaos of combat isn't necessarily repeatable because it's chaotic. Now, there are certain factors that come into play. That's universal principles of combat, but not every fight's the same. Not every violent action's the same. Now, there's certain similarities because we live in the confines of the world that we live in based on physics and science, but everybody's different. And we're constantly trying to have that golden space of the perfect technique that everybody's chasing, the perfect scenario everybody's chasing, the perfect practitioner, and the perfect enemy that everybody's trying to chase. And that is so unrealistic because we cannot have the same situation over and over and over. We have similar, but it's not exact the same. So I don't know. That's my observation.
Isn't that why we spar, or we should spar?
Agreed, but sparring is arbitrary. Sparring is arbitrary because there's a rule set. And the same argument can be said as this is why we pressure test.
Who sets the rule set?
That's a good question. It's dependent upon it's up to the individuals, one, to determine the rule set. If it is two people sparring, it's up to them to determine the rule set. If it is a semi-sanctioned event, like you were following the rules of boxing, following the rules of Muay Thai, et cetera, there is already an accepted rule set there based upon that structure. But rules in combat, are there? I mean, there are to a point legally, but reality is combat is chaos.
It is chaos. And we do Muay Thai, when you train Muay Thai in Thailand, when you're sparring in your own gym, how many elbows are thrown?
Not a lot.
And virtually none on purpose, right?
Oh yeah, safety, cuts the rock. Yeah, safety.
Sure, exactly. My whole point with this is simply to say, if we're trying to train for a specific outcome or a specific event, we can always set the rules ourselves.
Yes.
And we don't. and that could be a thing to investigate.
Mhm.
Is why am I leaving these holes, these gaps? As a good friend of mine, the man I highly respect in the industry over in South Africa says,
Mhm.
warriors die in the gaps.
Yeah. Yep.
When
I
we
agree.
leave gaps, when we create gaps, that's the spaces that we get taken advantage of.
Mhm. Yep. I can agree with that.
Um, so yeah, I just
Similar along those lines, I presented as a junior apprentice instructor at Water and Steel this year, and the thing that I presented is this concept about criminal creativity. Because the people at Water and Steel, you have a lot of law enforcement, military, martial artists. You have the who's who of that. The thing that I run into, and this is just my line of thought, the way I've trained and taught combatives and dealing with violence, is I look at it from the offensive criminal mindset, having lived that life for a time that I did. I look at the aspects of how does a criminal do stuff, because a man without rules is willing to do, and a man without rules and a reason to live by will do very interesting things. This is where like the punch out game comes into play, just that criminal chaos opportunistic mentality. The razor game comes to mind. And so the instruction that when I presented was I had a young lady who is a very young martial artist. I gave her a knife and I gave her four rules of got to control the pace, got to control the space, you have to keep the tip toward me, and you got to be creative. So I asked her, how would you attack me with a knife without any instruction? And the point being is being creative enough as a criminal, because that's the other qualifier. How would you do that? And she struggled. I mean, she did a lovely cutting pattern, but the fact is, where she struggled is she doesn't think that way because that's it's not the scope of her reality. And for people who come from the martial arts background and come from the law enforcement background, come from a moral structure, a having a moral structure based upon rules of the law, their badge, and their oath, they come from a very righteous authority and they try not to dip into the criminality mindset because that is not who they are. And that's really hard to train somebody as to like think like a criminal by doing some criminal shit in training, and trying to get them to refocus from that lens is incredibly difficult. Because when I presented this to the guys, is again, a lot of them are law enforcement, a lot of them are military, and they had a hard time like accepting the fact that you're going to cut somebody just to fuck with them. You're going to do some criminal opportunistic stuff because you're just doing it, and just think that way. And doing that in training is really tricky to simulate because we're already in a moral structure of a romantic structure of we are the good people. So I don't know what your thoughts on that.
well, first of all, my thoughts on that go, if you're dealing with people who live in a society or a culture that gets their praise and their validation through the level of violence that they can enact on
Hmm.
someone else,
Hmm.
it's going to completely change everything that you're capable of doing.
Yes, yes, it is.
And almost everyone that we would consider good people or normal people or citizens going about their lives here, they don't think like that, and they have a hard time comprehending the very idea of truly committing violence,
Agreed, because we're
or
told all our
even,
life, keep your hands to yourself.
or even wrapping their head around what does violence look like.
Right, right.
Okay. Um, I would also say that having experienced an extensive amount of criminals,
Hmm.
every one of them had rules that they had to deal with.
Yep.
Now, those rules were extremely different, and that's probably what a better way to say it, or what we mean is these rules are extremely different than what the rest of us deal with, but they still have rules.
Yes, yes, I agree.
And whenever we talk, if we understand what those rules are, that
Hmm.
does help deal with these things.
Agreed.
Now, here's the last part
Yeah.
that doesn't ever get talked about.
Hmm.
Some people enjoy violence,
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. And
and
that's that.
violence is the ultimate commodity.
Yes, it is.
And for those people that enjoy violence and that one way or another are not constrained by the possible repercussions of committing said violence, what could possibly control them or stop them from doing whatever they choose to do?
More violence. Again, to use Tim Larkin, when violence is the answer, it's the only answer. To use other quotes, to destroy a thing is to own a thing. I mean, it goes. I mean, the threat of violence is what keeps society together, and people don't want to think about that because that's scary, and we're trying to be an enlightened society. But the fact of the matter is, when the risk is real of actual violence, people stay pretty in check. I mean, for example, I live up here in Alaska. Everybody's got a gun. Everybody assumes you got a gun. The actual threat of violence keeps the community fairly in check, where there's not a lot of contact based upon ego. Now there's criminal opportunity, and that's a thing. But the fact is, the threat of actually getting shot because everybody legally carries up here, that keeps things in check. And that's how Texas used to be. It's how a lot of states used to be. So now, the other part about that is having a society and a community that's willing to use that skill set and that tool also keeps things in check. Yeah.
That's yes. And isn't that part of what we're talking about with the whole thing of examining what we're really looking at? For instance, if you notice what you said, you went immediately to when we referred to violence, you immediately went to people getting shot, guns, etc. Okay.
Yep.
If we display, which is an example of what I was talking about with in our region, because let's say we displaced this and we went to someplace in the Philippines or Africa or Central Asia, even Eastern Asia, even over some of those places. Would it not be just as reasonable to expect that those people, or even some places in America, those people would have replaced gun with knife?
Absolutely. Having grown up in Southern California doing the gangbanging thing, it was razor blades, craft knives, and screwdrivers. The 2 times I've been stabbed, it was with razor blades. It was like little break off razor blades. It wasn't a gun. I mean, I've been shot at quite a few times, but it wasn't the gun that I worried about. What I worried about was the Mexican gangbanger poking me with a razor blade or slashing me with a razor blade. So that is the real risk, the real threat.
It is. And it goes to, what does that look like? How are they attacking? For instance, because I teach so much in the firearms, let's touch on firearms since that was brought up.
Yeah.
In the firearms training community, one of the standards that's brought into that's used constantly is this sub 1 second draw.
Yep.
Can I draw and fire 1 or 2 rounds into my target and get reasonable hits in under 1 second?
I mean, it looks cool.
My submission to anyone that has any clue of what they're dealing with would be or rather my statement would be, that is a good tool for training when you understand how to use it as a training tool and to demonstrate weaknesses. But it has no place in reality, because in today's world, you will not experience the high noon showdown where you're quick draw, who's going to win. That's not it.
It's going to be a whole lot of shit draw or shit get offline. Yeah.
But the 2 types of draws that are needed, that we don't hardly deal with effectively because of training considerations or whatever the buzzword is that we want to use as an excuse,
Mhm.
The two types of draws that we do not use is the stress draw
Mhm.
or the surreptitious draw.
Yep. Yep.
We don't want to use either one of those, or we don't want to train either one of those, because for whatever reason, and I could list a whole number of reasons, and it may or may not be the right reason why certain people don't train it. Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
The fact remains, we don't. We also don't train to create a tactical pause.
Yep. Yep.
That's some of what I was talking about when I asked this question of, why don't we do that? Why don't we look at these things and train for these things of how do we create a tactical pause? Once we
Part of
do
it.
create that tactical pause, what do we do with it?
Mhm. I mean, part of that is people don't know what that is, and therefore they can't train it or teach it. So that's a big one. So defining it would be a good place to start, and then implementing a training protocol would be another place to start. But that requires everybody to come to agreement. What is the definition, and what's the protocol for training? So let's start with the definition for you. What is a tactical pause?
Tactical pause is simply a momentary lapse in action that allows me to either create time or space between us, or to bring something else into the engagement, somehow take control of the encounter through one of those couple of ways. That's all a tactical pause is.
Yep. Yep.
And that's where we could either move, we could deal with the situation with just our hands.
Mhm.
We can go through the draw under stress, whatever we need to do like that. That's where we could use that is through or during that tactical pause.
Yep. Agreed.
But that has to be part of our training.
I totally agree. And this is like I asked for the sake of the audience, and then this is also like the things that I ask in the community. I'm asking for the benefit of the audience because it often comes off as naive and silly. Because for those who have the knowledge, look at it like you should already have the knowledge. The fact of the matter is, a lot of people don't have the knowledge. So I ask these questions on their behalf because I don't really care about the ego standpoint because I have my own background, my own truth, my own history and education. But the fact is, a lot of people are afraid to ask these very simple but important questions for fear of ridicule, for fear of looking foolish, as to because if you're a martial artist, you should know these things. That right there is a misnomer. So again, I ask these questions for the sake of everybody else. So yeah, continue on.
But then if we take that a step further, not only how do we create the tactical pause, but then what do we do with it whenever we do create it?
Yep.
Both of those things have to be implemented into training for training to be effective. Perhaps we move.
Yep.
Perhaps we engage with something else.
Yep.
Whatever we do, we have to decisively act in that moment. That is not the time for us to ponder the situation and try to make a decision.
Agreed.
This is something that I incorporate into my training, into all my classes now, is how do we achieve these things? What is a draw under stress? What is a surreptitious draw? And I don't care if that's for a knife, if that's for a collapsible baton, if that's for if that's for a sap, if that's for some sort of cudgel, if that's for a gun, I don't care. Whatever it is, if that's for a pen, it's still the same thing.
Agreed.
So when I incorporate that into all of my training, and there's also a thought process that goes along with it that says I need to make decisions on, if this happens, I'm going to do this long before I ever actually enter into the scenario. Rather, when I'm at calm, when I'm at home, when I'm doing whatever, not at all in those stressful situations, that's the time for me to create the situations of how I'm going to act, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to deal with a scenario. So then when I am placed in the scenario, I don't have to think. I've already made the decisions. I've already done all of the deciding.
Mm-hmm.
I've short-circuited my OODA loop.
Agreed. You're fighting from a point of principles rather than techniques, and not fighting based upon opportunity. You're fighting based upon a scientific approach. Yeah, and that's a lot of people who chase the techniques, chase the scenario, don't realize that it's the principles that keep things the same across the board. Despite like the chaos of combat, there are certain principles that are always the same no matter what, because we're confined to the universe that we are. And so the fighting is contained within the universe that we exist in.
The body can only move in so many ways.
That is correct.
So, but yeah, this is some of where we've had this conversation before about Filipino martial arts and what do we call them and where and how. But these are some of the things that I think we need to really be examining and looking at. Not because the Filipino martial arts don't contain these things, because they absolutely do contain all of these answers.
Yep. But there's only like such a specific view of what FMA looks like because of social media. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
But since we do have these answers, we need to be looking at how do we express this? How do we convey we have these answers? It's extremely effective. And this is what these answers are. And this is how we approach these different scenarios. And I think if we would do that, it would change the perception of FMA.
Agreed. The resistance that I hear in the back of my head, because I've had this resistance brought to me by presenting stuff like this, is one, definition, what is FMA? Definition, what is a Filipino? There's that in here. But the other one is, what are we trying to do with FMA? Are we trying to maintain cultural, historical heritage and lineage as to like what point of history are we doing? Or are we training combat? The answer can be both, because it is both. But the presentation, the resistance in the mind of why are we turning FMA into a homogenous combat skill set, particular for a military, paramilitary structure, when we have our cultural heritage and lineage to pay attention to. That is the balance that I hear in the back of my head, and it's because that's what's been told to me, and when I've made these statements in the past. It is thoroughly possible to have both. It really is. So
I have an answer to that.
Go for it.
When you truly examine the history of the the Philippine archipelago, and I'm aware of what I'm saying whenever I say it that way, but that's why I'm saying it that way.
Yeah. No, I hear.
How do you extrapolate one from the other? How do you extrapolate the history from the combat? Because without the combat, how would they have a history, and how would they be there today?
Agreed.
So, by definition, isn't exploring, maintaining, and preserving the combative history of the culture also maintaining and propagating the cultural history?
Oh, absolutely.
When we look at Sinawali, if we understand what these things are, when we look at Sinawali, how was that trained? When, at the time of the Spanish, that was not allowed to be trained. That's why we could not use terms like Kali, and it changed to Eskrima or Arnis, because we couldn't use those terms. So how do we train a Sinawali?
With sticks in the jungle or in the backyard. Yeah.
Or
in cultural dances.
Weaving palm friends. How do we train everything that we look at? I can speak from Pekiti, from training with Tuhan Mel, and the history that he has told me and showed me. And that is every movement that we have in Pekiti Tirsia was also a movement in their daily life as they were growing up. So they were training for combat in literally everything they were doing as they were just living.
Yep. And that's a mindset shift. And people don't think about that because they don't think about violence, don't think about the purpose behind it, they don't think about warfare. Because in a modern society, we've sanitized that from our general lexicon as a community. Because we haven't been forced to.
I
Certain people.
If you'll allow me, I'm going to go off on just a little bit of a tirade here.
Go for it.
I've been extremely fortunate in that the only way that I have ever learned any Filipino system was I went to a good friend of mine's house in San Antonio, Texas, and stayed there, and he showed me Ilustrísimo Bahadzubu.
Yep.
He learned it by going to the Philippines and living with Yuli Romo and being taught by Yuli at his house.
Nice.
My Pekiti Tirsia, I've never been to a Pekiti seminar in my life.
That's fair.
I've had either Mandala Rich or Tuhan Mel come to my house and stay at my house and teach me at my house, or I've gone to Mandala Rich's house and stayed at his house and had him teach me.
That's the sacred tradition. That is the sacred tradition of how things are taught, is in the backyard.
That's the only way I've ever learned it.
Yeah.
Period. So So as part of this, it's also been what's the history and what's the cultural significance and what does it mean and how do we, all of those things that go with it. And you're right in something that you're saying of all of those things are just as important as the martial aspect of it. But we have to know all of those aspects in order to convey those along with the martial aspects of it. And I would submit to you that a lot of people get one side but not the other.
Agreed.
And how many seminars have you been to?
Quite a few.
How difficult was it to get in-depth understanding of everything that was going on when you were in that setting?
Pretty much not. The depth comes around the dinner table or the one-on-one conversations. But even that's pretty limited.
And that's something that I think we need to get back to, which is difficult by all means. It's absolutely difficult to do in today's modern world where we want the convenience of doing something via the internet or a seminar or some microwave version of whatever it is we're trying to achieve.
Agreed. Absolutely.
But I do think it holds a merit and a value that you can't truly understand until you experience it for yourself.
Agreed. And this is where I find like the balance in this modern era is the podcast space, the documentation space allows us to have the conversations as to the why, because that gets missed because we're so focused on the doing. So having the balance of the both helps overall. And because we haven't had that in a broad spectrum in the past, especially pre-internet, it was based upon, again, conversations at the dinner table, hanging out in the living room. But that is on a very one-to-one basis, not in the masses. So we're in a very awesome point of our history as martial artists, specifically Filipino martial artists, that we can have the conversations present and available in real time and archived, and we have so much training available. So it's up to the individual to actually pursue the both.
But do we have the conversations? And do we have the in-depth understanding? And is it really available?
To some it is. With some it is.
To some it is, yes.
Yep.
But I think also that's part of what creates the issues is we're so worried about we can attend so many trainings, be it on the internet or seminars or whatever. We can attend so many of those. And as so often happens, if we attend X number, we achieve X rank, whatever that is. So then we're presented as if we are extremely knowledgeable or experienced in something, even though all we have ever trained and all we've ever truly experienced is a very surface level exposure to what we're supposedly being presented as experts on.
Because the life is dangerous, and for the people who haven't lived the life, there's that huge risk of like actual failure, whether it is like they failed to the ego, that's a big one. Failure can lead to egregious harm, death, and emotional trauma. The other one is like legal aspects. So like the typical mom and pop's martial arts academy who's trying to be everything underneath the sun and runs into like professional integrity issues. They don't want to do this stuff but they want to talk about this stuff because they're highly educated, but they don't want to do the stuff because it's dangerous. It's a meme, but the fact is, I don't want to fight. It's dangerous. A guy could get hurt. I mean, that's a whole Monty Python skit. But the fact of the matter is, you have to live the life. Go ahead. Yeah.
But if all we attend is seminars, and we go to a 2-day seminar or a 3-day seminar, and then come back, and then go to a seminar somewhere else, we've attended countless seminars, but how much do we truly understand?
Not a lot. Not a lot.
So if that's the case, aren't those same people very often presented as supposed experts?
Yes, they are. Absolutely are.
And that could have the potential to lead to severe misunderstandings in what's being presented.
And this is
why there are so many shortcomings.
And this is what we were talking about earlier, I think offline, the difference between experiential knowledge and intellectual knowledge. Because you can be really book smart, but unless you've experienced it, there's a certain level of intellect that you just don't have. Because again, one can talk about the history of warfare by way of 20 years fighting in the GWAT versus somebody who's actually fought in the GWAT. There's that. Or in the aspect of childbirth. I can intellectually, educationally understand the process of childbirth, but I haven't gone through childbirth. So there's just a bit of knowledge there I just don't have. I can talk about fighting in the ring, but unless I've actually fought in the ring, there's again some knowledge that I'm missing. So it's along those lines. At least I think it is.
It is. And we talked a little bit about at the beginning of this about my background, whatever, and I will be the first to admit that I do a very poor job of self-promotion. I'm not very good at it at all.
So do I. I do a terrible job at that. Mainly because I don't care.
But honestly, part of what I draw from is I've bounced in Colorado, and to understand the club that I bounced at in Colorado, we would have up to 2,000 people inside the club on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night.
Yep.
If you can imagine it, it happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
I bounced in Georgia, and that was everything you could imagine and more.
Oh yeah, I was stationed.
And then I bounced in New York, and we had an asshole for a DJ. Excuse my French.
No, that's
because
fair.
He set it up to do it. There's a Little John song that I cannot hear today without getting mad
Totally
to the
fair.
wall. Because every time that song would come on, the entire club was fighting.
Yeah.
And the bouncer would play that at least once a night.
Yeah.
Okay. What that does, I'm not bringing that up for any other purpose other than to say what that does is it exposes you to both experiencing and witnessing violence at all sorts of levels when you do that kind of thing. And it does it repeat every night you're working, you're seeing exorbitant amounts of violence. Okay? So then you start cataloging it and filing it and looking at what's effective, what's not, what works, what doesn't, what really happens, what doesn't happen, all of those kind of things. And it truly, it allows you to see where things, what's effective and what's not for what you're trying to do. And that's common throughout most everything. For instance, if you look at modern Army combatives, okay, I'm a level 3 instructor in that. I trained up to battalion level, all that kind of stuff. Yep, did it.
Got it. Yep.
Here, let me. I mean, I know one of the guys here that I live right down the road from one of the guys that helped start it. They're winning all this kind of stuff. It is extremely Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based.
Yes, it is. It really is, because it's more intramural than combative.
So you start looking at it and you go, does it build some things? Sure. Is it really effective in combat? You put on a plate carrier and load magazines and grenades and tourniquets and 2 or 3 guns and an assault pack and a helmet and nods and the assortment the sundry other things that we carried. And now tell me that you want to roll around on the ground in some cramped little mud house with all that stuff on.
I proved that it doesn't work because doing training at my unit, I was demonstrating that it doesn't work at the behest of an injury of one of my troopers. But the fact of the matter is, it proved the fact that you had a dude attacking you that was not full kitted out, won the engagement because the guy with all the crap on could not achieve the clinch and couldn't take the guy down without getting hurt. So, I mean, proven the fact.
If modern Army combatives work so well, why did they bother coming up with the Special Operations Combatives Program?
I mean, like, get offline, shoot the guy, get offline, let your buddy shoot the guy? Absolutely, because it works. Use that weapon system.
Get offline, cut him off your gun if he grabs your gun, shoot him off your gun. We get away from him, we create distance, we create angles, we work in teams, all of those things. The standards that work. But there's reasons for this, and it comes from examining what situations are we dealing with, what are people exposed to, and how do we counter those, and how do we prepare those people for encountering these situations. If we go back in history and look at the history of the Filipino archipelago, I would challenge you to find a more exhaustively tested system somewhere.
Oh yeah, tribal raids. Yeah, you get really good at ambushing and dealing with ambushes when you're constantly raiding the tribe next to you on the next island. And when you got 7,000 islands with 7,000 different tribes, they got really good at it. And the fact is,
that's not even counting the Spanish.
And then the Americans and the Japanese.
Exactly. So when you look at all that, you go, well, it's been tried. That's how we know it works.
Absolutely.
But we have to practice it the way it's been tried, the way it's been done. You earlier brought up Serrata. Well, why did Angel Caballos wear the red headband?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know enough about Serrata to actually speak on that. So
let's put it this way: he earned it.
That's fair. It's totally fair.
Okay. He earned it before going to Stockton.
Okay.
That's the reasons. Now, is it also possible that at those times, the Ginunting, the Bolo, the Chris, the Barong, whatever, was a standard weapon, and we had that in our hands so often, whether it was because we were using it on the farm or because we were going into battle or whatever else. So we knew we were going to have 1 or 2 in our hands, and we trained with that, we fought with that, we used that right from the start. Versus now, where we don't have these weapons in our hands, whatever, and we have our empty hands, and we must create a scenario where we can use those same weapons or whatever we have at the time to our benefit.
Agreed, because it's a different scope of reality. Because the fact of the matter is, if I walk around Walmart with an AR-15 in my hands, I'm going to get shot. So to use that modern analogy as to walking around the Philippines with a bolo in my hand, that's pretty innocuous and common. Roll it forward 200 to 300 years, the bolo has been replaced with a rifle, and that's socially awkward, just at a minimum. So
I would submit to you that there's still places where you can walk around in the Philippines with a bolo in your hands.
absolutely,
But there's
agreed.
also places in the Philippines where you better not be walking around with a bolo in your hands.
Yep, there absolutely is.
Which goes to the initial question.
Mhm.
And really, all of this, my point with asking all of this has simply been to say, shouldn't training reflect reality? And for it to be beneficial training, it must be recent, it must be relevant, and it must be realistic.
Agreed. I totally agree with you in all that statement. Because the thing that I run into looking at how FMA is presented in the online community is you have people speaking from the experiences based upon their region and their backgrounds. So when they're talking about the care and concern of how they deal with personal protection, it is regional and to their experience. Because the way somebody defends themselves in a non 2A state is going to be different for somebody who defends themselves in a 2A state. So just to use the American approach, comparatively to like,
There's a third thing, though. There's a third thing.
yep, go for it.
Also, when the way people present themselves present this on the internet is the things that are attractive and will grab people's eye. Because as Mandala Rich says constantly to me, people eat with their eyes. So if we want people to follow us, to buy from us, to buy into us, to be interested in us, we must show them something that looks cool.
Yep, because getting smashed on the mat isn't sexy. I mean, it's to some people, but again, getting smashed on the mat, trying to get that weapon out is not sexy.
Real violence does not look like a Hollywood movie. And
No,
John Wick is not real.
No, it's not.
I'm just saying that's the three reasons. I agree with you on the first two, but we can't forget that third reason.
Oh no, I also agree with you on that. So thank you for bringing that additional because that adds to the validity of this conversation.
And it goes back to what's more important, selling tickets or selling seats at a seminar or presenting the system in the most effective manner.
Again, there's two ways to look at this. They'll look at it from the businessman or look at it from the sense of reality of people who are actually going to use this. And too often I see it's from the mindset of the businessman because you got to feed yourself, you got to feed your kids. But those who actually use this stuff not often are the people who are actually teaching this stuff. It's the people who often teach this stuff are the people who are actually using this stuff. It's a weird paradox.
I would also submit to you that if we could do a better job presenting the people that actually know what they're doing and are actually working this in the effective manner that it's intended, if we could present those people in such a way that it drew interest, and we could start that snowball from here's truth. I absolutely believe truth sells itself.
Agreed. Provided that people know what they're looking at or know what they're hearing.
Thank you. Exactly.
And it goes back to like the boxing analogy. Not every great boxer will turn into a great coach. Not every great coach was an okay boxer. So, and that's, again, the paradox we run into is you got people who are knowledgeable and skillful, but they're not there and available to teach, or they're not very good at teaching, but they're very good at their craft. Vice versa, you got people who are phenomenal practitioners and teachers, but don't have the history behind their craft. And trying to find a balance to like work with and present in a dual situation, I think is part of the change. And this is where like having good collaborations is also a big part of this change from the FMA community or just in the combatives community in general.
I agree.
Everybody needs a
Well,
front man. So
let me submit this to you.
okay.
Have you done? I know you're well versed in boxing. Have you
Mhm.
done much research on the old school boxing, the bare knuckle boxing, that sort of thing, rough
Yep.
and tumble stuff? Okay.
Yeah, my adoptive grandfather was a bare knuckle boxer. So yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Look at how a few things have so watered down and almost bastardized boxing today.
I mean this
Between the bare knuckle, between the Marquis de Queensberry rules,
Mhm.
which was just a result of somebody getting killed in a boxing match.
Yeah.
The wraps on the
Mhm.
hands and the
Mhm.
gloves.
Mhm.
Now we believe that punching people breaks hands. We believe that this is an effective guard, and we believe that it's okay to fight, and most times even good to fight with our weight on our front foot.
No.
I'm just saying those
Yeah.
three things are what they. And I mean, you look at like Mike Tyson.
Mhm.
His weight was on his front foot almost his entire career.
Yep.
Well, okay, compare
You
that
chop.
to back when boxing was real.
Yep. Yep.
We fought completely different on purpose.
Yep. We did. We absolutely did. Or I say we as people did. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, one could possibly make the correlation between Filipino martial arts and that old style boxing.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's so much of our history, so much of the things that we're based in have been lost over the course of time.
Yep. And watered down based upon presentation. So because people often discard stuff that doesn't meet their agenda, their narrative, and also their understanding. That's a big one. Yeah. So a lot of that stuff goes on the chopping floor. They just don't know what they're looking at because they don't have the experience or the intellect to express it.
And the other part is, if we're just being honest,
Mhm.
we've become a society of soft people that wants easy answers.
Absolutely. Absolutely, we have.
I've seen, for instance, I've seen lots of different grips on knives in Pekiti Tirsia, we'll say.
Mhm.
Okay? Rather than trying to tell somebody how to do, what's right, what's wrong, where to do, all that kind of thing.
Mhm.
You know, one of the things that I've done with every one of my students is I'm going to give you a training knife, and
Mhm.
you're going to go stab a post for an hour
Yep.
with the
Yep.
training knife.
That'll
You know what?
definitely important. Yep.
I don't have to tell you how to hold the knife after that.
Yep.
It becomes self-evident. Okay? When we're hitting solid things, when we're actually cutting, we're actually stabbing, we're actually doing,
Mhm.
it's self-evident.
Yep. The dynamic of doing changes the scope of reality. Again, going back to like the argument of American martial arts is there's a difference between kata and forms versus people who get in the ring. To use that very simple analogy, it's different between doing carenza versus actually stabbing the shit out of a post.
I would submit to you that the reason we have such differentiation is because we don't truly understand how to shadow box.
Yes, absolutely. I 100% agree on that one. Because people don't know what they're looking for. If you
Yeah,
don't know what you're looking for, then you can't replicate it or perceive how to deal with it.
and we don't really know how to turn it. We're so caught up in catchphrases
Mm-hmm.
and appearances
Mm-hmm.
that we've lost truth.
Yep.
Um,
And
For instance, somebody somewhere at some point came up with the lie that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, which, if you actually examine that, the only way that you can come to any sort of truth is if you add extra words to the statement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because by definition, that statement is false in absolutely every way.
Yep. You have to explain
But we believe it.
Right.
But we believe it because that's what we've been told over and over, with nobody asking the question, how? Why?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? We also believe that if we can flow in some aesthetically pleasing manner
Mm-hmm.
from one movement into the next movement, somehow that translates to actual combat.
Yep.
Okay? Without footwork, without weight shift, without hip transfer, without all of those elements that go into fighting,
Mm-hmm.
it can't translate. There's no way it can possibly translate.
No, it's theoretical. That's what it
And
is
when
at that point.
And when I do those things, when I add those elements into the movement, it completely changes what I'm capable of.
Mm-hmm.
It completely changes. It changes power, it changes speed, it changes timing, it changes everything whenever I do that. So often people eliminate those things because it makes performing a prescribed set of movements so much more difficult.
And I think also like trying to express or explain like the different things that we're doing at different stages of training. Like we're doing gross motor movement, we're doing fine tuning of body mechanics. Then we're doing this with application of impact. We're doing this application of impact with consequence of a return. Now we're doing this in a free. Like those right there, that's work. That's like 5-6 different stages of doing a single technique. And too often people just want to, because their short-term perspective and their attention span is so limited, and also they don't have the time or the willingness, they are only willing to do one, which is flail the air and look cool, versus getting smashed on the mat and doing all these other things that helps inform that truth.
And that's true, but we also want to tell them perform everything with intention.
Yeah. Yep.
And the problem is, if I've never experienced violence, how do I know what intention even looks like?
Yep. And that goes back to the criminal creativity thing that I talked about in the beginning. Unless you're in that mindset, and the same with the fighting mindset, that violent mindset, unless that is the scope of reality because you're going to use it and do it, how do you have the intentionality of it? Because it's a very different thing of like, I can think about it versus I'm actually going to do it because I have done it and I will do it. Because we can sit here and talk about stuff all day, but until you actually sit there and consider what you're doing, going through those mental experiments. I often talk about mental experiments or thought experiments of like, how do I do this? How to put myself in the mindset, and then I'm going to practice it and demonstrate it. People just don't think that way. I mean, as much as we say to think that way, people don't think that way.
Can I throw something out here just for clarification, please?
Yeah, go for it.
When you're referring to criminal creativity,
mm-hmm.
let's just clarify that just a second.
Yep.
I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe what you're referring to is the creativity associated with the approach,
mm-hmm.
the presentation,
mm-hmm.
the setup,
mm-hmm.
the ambush.
Mm-hmm.
The actual act
mm-hmm.
is extremely rudimentary and basic.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and
it
then
is.
And then there's also creativity in the escape.
Yep.
Okay. But the actual act of performing, for
mm-hmm.
instance, a very common method of attack for a certain group of Mexicans in American prisons is to target someone. We will have one or two guys that will have knives, and then we'll
mm-hmm.
have another couple of guys that will be close around.
Yep.
The two guys with knives will use something to distract the individual,
mm-hmm.
most likely after vigorous exercise,
mm-hmm.
distract him or rock him to sleep, as they say,
mm-hmm.
lull him into believing nothing's happening. They will
mm-hmm.
suddenly attack him from behind or the side to start with, stab him repeatedly in the sewing machine, bang, 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 bang. And then those two will break off and go in completely separate directions. And as soon as they go in separate directions, two other guys will approach and just start beating the crap out of this guy. The two guys that did the stabbings will then pass those knives off to one or two more guys in the process, and they will dispose of it. So what it looks like is two guys hit this guy, then two more guys hit this guy. Now this guy's leaking from everywhere. Who actually did the killing, and where did the weapons go?
Nobody knows.
That's where the creativity comes from. The actual act of how do we go about performing the violence? That's extremely rudimentary. If I have a knife in a sock or hammer grip, it's going to be a low thrust repeatedly. If I have it in a pakal grip or an ice pick grip, it's going to be a high down hammer. And that's it. That's the two attacks it's going to be. Somebody is most likely going to grab a hold of them and hang on while we're stabbing them. Then we're going to separate. So the creativity comes in the pre-attack and the post-attack actions. The attack has no creativity.
No, it doesn't.
And that's some things that I just wanted to clarify there, because when we as martial artists look at this, if we don't truly understand what we're dealing with, what we think of when you talk about criminal creativity is the flowery credenza that we have, and did we mix pawa sunkete with etiquette, and where's our palasut, all of these different things, when that has no bearing on anything that's actually being done.
Agreed. Nope, we're on the same page there. So yeah, agreed. So another simple one is the razor game. So the razor game, in my experience having received it and been involved with it, is you walk through a crowd and you just cut a person and see if you can get away with it. Or you walk through a crowd, cut a person to distract them to do something else with it. Because not every cut has to kill. You can just cut somebody to fuck with them. You just can. So, and the game there is, how do you get out? How do you get away with it? So, not saying people do this, not to suggest people should do this, but the fact of the matter is it exists. It's out there. But again, that's that mindset.
These are rules, and this is where they're gaining acceptance and glory, is through committing these acts of violence.
Yep.
That has to be understood, because Colonel Grossman, in my opinion, in dealing with dogs and animals and people and everything else, severely missed his analogy of the sheep and the sheepdogs.
He really did. He really did.
He missed it bad. A sheepdog does nothing other than control the sheep for the shepherd. That's all the sheepdog does. It's the wolf. It's the wild dog that does not want to be around people, that is solitary. That's what stands between the wolf and the sheep. And the closer it is to the wolf, the better job it does of standing against the wolf.
But people want to romanticize. People want to romanticize the analogy. That's basically what it is. People want to romanticize themselves as the good guy, which we should be the good guy. But yeah.
But the problem is anyone who's done this knows the sheep, whoever they are, and they know, people know in their heart of hearts who that is or not. But the sheep don't truly want that particular animal around unless the wolf is close. Then I want you to come. I want you to dispatch of the wolf, and then I want you to take you and your scary teeth and your scars and your overbearing, dominant attitude and your intimidating stare, and I want you to go away because you remind me too much of the wolf.
Yep. People want to outsource their safety. I have part of my education and training is talking about like the scale of which society has been. And a previous form of our society, everybody used violence to some extent, was trained, experienced to it, because the fact is that's the scope of the reality. On the other side of that shift to society it is now is that our safety has been outsourced to a very small pocket of the population for the behest of the good of the larger set of the population. But the fact of the matter is, humans learned how to fucking fight before they learned how to farm, to use that phrase and analogy. Farming being having a pleasant and happy society. And people don't want to take accountability for their own safety. They want to say somebody else's job to do it. It's somebody else who does those things. It's those people who do those things, but me, because my morality and my unwillingness to do stuff, I don't want to see it, do it, or even acknowledge it because it's scary. And it's doing us a disservice.
And by outsourcing my violence, it allows me to maintain the moral high ground.
Yep, that is correct. That is correct.
In my own mind, anyway. And we're seeing that throughout our country at this point.
We absolutely are. I mean, what's the phrase? Hard times create hard men. Soft times create soft men.
Hard times create soft times create soft men. Soft men create hard times. Hard times create hard men. Hard men create soft times.
And we're in that cycle again. We're in that cycle. I don't think
we're definitely in the soft man category.
We absolutely are. Absolutely are. I think we're also at the soft men and the diluted soft men category, because you have a lot of people that are relying on the curtails of the experience of others and have the intellectual process to discuss this stuff, but haven't done this stuff, and now they're coming at as the authority, as what we've been talking about for the past hour. So,
but the dichotomy lies in the fact that never has America had so many combat experienced veterans in its time.
Nope. 20 years we got really good. 20 years we got really, really good at what we do.
I was talking to a group of ROTC cadets, and I was stopped and told I had to change the way I expressed this by their commander whenever I told them that they're going into the Army and their job in the Army is to perfect the art of killing people.
Yep, kill the enemy. Yep, it's our job.
That's what they must do, and they must come to terms with that and prepare for it.
You're in a profession of arms. This is what you do.
And I was told that is not true, and that is not what we want to present, and that's not the image that we want to propose right now. So we need to look at it a different way. That's not what we do.
And it's scary because in the past, America was about winning. Okay, we were the winners. We did not ever think that we were going to lose, because we win and do the things necessary to win. This is why we fight with fire superiority and don't fight fair. We just win. The problem that to use that corollary, violent criminals who do violent criminal shit also don't think like they're ever going to lose. They have the mindset of they're going to win and do shit necessary to win. And it's that same mentality. It's just people associate the two as the same thing now, because they don't want to accept the fact that you have to be exceptional at the thing to maintain the winning. So
is that why we have so diluted the training, just as we're talking about in this, is because we're not as worried about using it for real as we are about whatever other consideration may enter our head at that time?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like I said, this question is one that I've been really looking at, and I've been trying to let it drive how I train Pekiti, also how I train everything else, if you will. If I mean, the way Pekiti's been presented to me is there is nothing outside of Pekiti, because Pekiti is encompassing everything. If I train guns, well, rifles fall into Malaya Sabat category. Pistols fall into Tirsia subsystem. So
Mhm.
we're training one thing, we're training everything. And anytime I move, anytime in anything that I'm doing, if I pick up a pen,
Mhm.
I'm training. So
Mhm.
anything that I'm doing is training if I do it that way.
Yep.
So I'm really trying to focus what I'm presenting in training as here's how it translates to realistic application. Here's the
Mhm.
things that you're going to see, and here's how you deal with those, and here's what it is. Ironically, we can talk about Pekiti Tirsia, we can talk about Illustrissimo Bahadzubu, we can talk about old school boxing, we can talk about rough and tumble American fighting, which I just use those two because those are real, though those are American martial arts,
Mhm.
Filipino martial arts. We can talk about any system. Do you want to? I mean, we can talk about Thai with Muay Baran. We can talk about Burmese with what they do. Um, if you look at the effective techniques that are used,
Mhm. It's pretty
they're
straightforward.
the same. They're the same. The
Yep.
footwork is the same. The striking angles are the same. The body mechanics are almost exactly the same. It's the same stuff. Fighting is fighting.
It is. Again, Battle Drill 1 Alpha. Survive the initial engagement, achieve fire superiority, and achieve combat control of the combat space. So,
And and that's you're right. That's exactly what we're doing. Is I mean, we take individual combat, unarmed combat, and now you're translating it all the way up into FM7-8 and
mhm.
military doctrine. But
Mhm.
and it's all the same.
Yep, it is.
Um, if we train it that way,
Mhm.
the thing to keep in mind is how do I get to this?
Yeah.
I don't care what I can do with it. I don't care what you can do with it.
Mhm.
How do you get to it? How do you bring it into the engagement?
Mhm.
Okay.
You create
Um,
combat. You create tactical pauses. That's how you do it. So you give you time and space and opportunity to bring that weapon to bear. Again,
Now,
using the tactical level, how do I bring that big gun into the fight? Well, I have to achieve fire superiority in space and timing to bring
but
that
I
gun
have
in.
to achieve that tactical pause
Yep.
and then understand how to access what I have.
Mhm.
And then I have to understand what is the reasons. What are the reasons for me to utilize a weapon in an
Mhm.
engagement?
Mhm.
There's really only two reasons to utilize a weapon in an engagement of any kind. And the weapon can be anything from a pen. I mean, anything can be a weapon if it's used right, but there's
Mhm.
really only two reasons.
You think you're
And
going to lose?
well, but we can and we can be using it for either one or both of these reasons at the same time. And those reasons are it increases the amount of combat power or force that we can bring to the engagement, number
Mhm.
one. And number
Mhm.
two, it increases the range between me and my attacker, thus creating the more I can dictate the range, the safer I can keep myself.
Mhm.
So that's the two reasons to bring a weapon into the engagement. Now, I'm well aware of the fact that someone could argue, well, if I have a knife in Pakal grip or in the ice pick grip, how am I increasing the range? Yes, you're right. But at the same time, I am
Increase
increasing
the
the amount
power.
of combat power brought to the engagement.
Yep. Yep.
So those are the two reasons to bring the weapon into the engagement. Now,
Mhm.
if we look at this from a legal standpoint,
Mhm.
I must survive the encounter.
Mhm.
Then I must create the tactical pause necessary for me to decide what to do with how I'm going to terminate the encounter. Okay?
Mhm.
Because that's really what I'm trying to resolve is how do I terminate this encounter?
Mhm.
And I can do that through creating space, time, and distance between myself and my attacker
Mhm.
by using one of the five methods of ending a fight,
Yep.
one of the five ways of ending a fight. Um, that's really the only ways that I can terminate this engagement is one of those two things. Okay. Now, at the same time, I have to ensure that if I'm going to use lethal force, that the three requirements to utilize lethal force and have it be self-defense are all met at the same time.
Agreed. Absolutely.
With those three requirements being, do they have the intention of using whatever? Do they have means, intent, and opportunity? So, what is their means of performing grave bodily injury or death on me, inducing that? Do they intend to do so to me? And do they have the opportunity to do that? If those three things are not met, well, now as soon as I go to introducing a lethal force multiplier into the engagement, I just became the attacker. Now I'm the criminal. Now I'm subject to all of the legal ramifications associated with things.
There's a lot of ways to lose the fight, even though you won the fight.
Absolutely there are.
Yeah.
And very, very few of those ways are immediately in the situation. And there's a whole lot of them that occur after the situation. So yeah, all of those things have to be met at that time, or if not, I'm going to be in trouble.
Yep.
So
and
that's a consideration that we have to consider all the time in training. How do we do this?
And it boils down to why we fight. And why we fight varies from person to person and at different stages of our life. But the fact is we have to clearly define why are we fighting, and why are we and as a result of it, why are we training, what are we training, and what are we training for? And until somebody actually has an honest conversation with themselves and their training partners and their instructor, we're caught in this messy like delusion of romanticism and the flashy stuff we see on the internet.
Okay. Perhaps could we also submit that you can train for three reasons. You decide if there's a multiplicity of this or combination, or if it's just simply one. And those three reasons are sport competition, to learn the historical system, or for practical application of self-defense, being your own bodyguard.
So combat, sport, art, and history.
There you go.
Absolutely, I agree.
And you may decide that you're training for multiple of those, or simply one. But I would submit to you that if it's when you start training and when you start looking at this, the instructor needs to be honest about what they teach. What are they teaching? What are they doing? And B, you need to be honest with yourself. Why am I trying to train?
And that's where the importance of verbal qualifiers in this situation and the training scenario and the techniques, tactics, and principles that are being applied are very important. But unfortunately, as a lot of instructors are out there, they may be great at their craft, but they are not very good teachers because they don't have, one, the presence of mind to say, here's the verbal qualifier of, we will use this or can use this for this reason. Instead of, in FMA, we do this. Because I hear that a lot from people who are of the uninitiated, the unblooded.
And it's possible that I may train in Pekiti Tirsia for the purpose of being able to protect myself and my loved ones.
Absolutely.
Ancillarily, what occurs is I learn the historical relevance of it and the cultural significance associated with what I'm doing. And tertiarily, I use that word, I work that in the conversation on purpose.
That was great. Well done.
I can use this in a sport type setting, whether it's in stick fighting or it's in whatever. I can use it in a sport type setting. while that is not my primary objective, it is a cursory benefit associated with a well-rounded, properly taught, effective system.
Mm-hmm. Being able to clearly define that in your mind and sub-compartmentalize that is a skill in and of itself, because you got a lot of people on the internet, a lot of people in modern martial arts that don't have that capability of saying, these are the different things that I do for these different reasons, and having that big picture in mind of why we fight, because they paint with the same brush for everything. And that's a fault on their own. It's also a fault of the culture that they grow up in, like the training culture, because if the training culture doesn't put those clear definitions to help mold and guide that person, they're going to be continually deluded.
Are you from Northern California or Southern California?
I grew up in Lancaster, and I bounced between Lancaster and Oceanside the majority of my childhood.
Okay, perfect. Well, then I'm going to use this as a scenario for you.
Yeah.
Tito Ortiz trained for sport fighting.
Yep, but the dude could fight, dude could brawl.
But some of the guys that was with him in his gym, they were not sport fighters.
No, they were not.
They were the real deal.
They're straight bangers, straight up word.
Yep. And the reason that matters, I keep going back to this, the reason that matters is we got to look at, what are we trying to do? Why are we trying to do this? Because if I just want to learn how to swing a stick, okay, fine, cool. Just swing a stick, great, no problem. That's wonderful. If I want to use it, well, then maybe I need to look at, how do I swing the stick in such a way that I'm translating it into my empty hands?
Yep.
And then what does it do for whenever I pick up a knife? And how does that translate to a spoon? I mean, whatever. So there's the honesty that needs to be part of this. So I guess if we want to be real honest about it, it comes down to this simple question, based on our previous conversation here.
Yep.
If all we've ever done is attend seminars, and we don't really have real world experience ourselves, how is it possible for us to understand the depth of what we're teaching, or what we should be teaching, to prepare people for realistic engagements?
Honestly, it's impossible. And people don't have the intellectual honesty to say that. They just don't, because they're chasing the dollar. And that is the unfortunate truth and reality that we live in. And it's up to the people who are actually seeing and seeking knowledge and training to be able to have the critical thinking and the critical eye to realize that that dude's full of shit versus, okay, that's a straight killer. And more importantly, that's a dude who can bang, but can communicate it in such a way that makes sense and is not a problem.
Yeah. And that's where we fail so often in this community, is separating that. And the other part, if we're being real honest, if we're being completely honest, we try so hard to not make waves, not offend people, not step on toes, not do all of those things. That,
some of us, at least.
Well, we may see the reality of that guy is full of shit and doesn't know what he's talking about, and is teaching motions no different than pole dancing for what he's doing there. But I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to piss him off or start any problems.
Yep.
Even though if I was the one to see it, I'm not the only one in the world that sees it, because I'm not the only one in the world with experience and knowledge and understanding of what this looks like, but none of us are willing to call it out and say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which does what? It causes a problem because it allows these things to just continue.
Yep, it does.
And that's where, I mean, I have to believe that that's what causes so many of the issues that we deal with so often.
Yep.
And that's really, all of this is really the basis of, or the catalyst, I should say, for the question that I asked you a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
That caused this podcast to occur.
Yes, sir. And the fact is, I am one of those guys that makes waves and asks the interesting and uncomfortable questions because, one, I'm at a point in my life that I can, because I'm not at the presence to make money off of this. I just want to ask questions for the sake of my own knowledge, but also I'm speaking on behalf of people who are afraid to ask questions. So this is the reason why I do stuff with Rubber Chicken. This is the reason why I do things with a sport. There's a reason why I do things that come off as silly, but I'm asking those questions that people are afraid to ask because we've been so presented with a lot of garbage over the years based upon charlatans saying this is the way, having not ever done it. So that's why I do that.
Okay, then let me ask you this question.
Yep.
When you ask all these questions of, is this FMA?
Yes.
What combat system is it really that you're demonstrating or that you're using whenever you're making those videos? Because it's not FMA.
That's
it can't be by definition.
That's the point. That's why I ask it. Because there isn't a name. There is no name.
Absolutely, there's a name.
It's human violence. It's human combat. And to use a brand, it's my own. It's the Loeffler family fighting method. To say that because it's unique to my experience, the knowledge handed down to me by my forefathers. It is basically the culmination of my knowledge, understanding, my capability of movement, my experience, and my way to communicate it. So that's technically the system, if you want to say there's a system. But the reality is, it's the way I move.
But isn't it also using the concepts of the various systems that you've trained, be it Pekiti Tirsia or Balintawak or boxing or whatever else? Isn't it also using those?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I title those videos, Is It FMA? Because it's subjective.
You just said yourself it's not subjective. The answer is always no.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. It's subjective. Subjective for the person. Sorry. And when I should say it's subjective to the person, because I'm asking the question for them. Is it FMA? My answer is it's not, because I'm the one doing the video and doing the stuff. But I'm asking on behalf of the person, do you think it's FMA based upon your lens of experience, your education, all those things? Because if somebody clearly says it's FMA, then because I know it's not FMA, they're already wrong, because we're looking constantly on what we think because what we know and what we think we know. But from my mouth, it's not FMA. It's the way that I move based upon the principles of a wide variety of stuff and experiences and education I've had. Now, if I'm qualifying this is a Balintawak movement, then yeah, it's FMA. But still, it's really not.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I mean,
it does. Now let me ask this.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm doing a Kimura,
mm-hmm.
or if I'm doing a double wrist lock,
mm-hmm.
or if I'm doing Timbagna,
mm-hmm.
the same position, all
mm-hmm.
three of those be the same position. Which one is it?
It's all and it's none. It depends on the language and scope of your presentation. But it's all human combat. It's basically what it is.
So what I hear you saying is the only reason why there are specific systems is because someone's ego caused them to brand it as such.
Yes.
And
yes.
I would submit to you that there's possibly a deeper reason for the separation of systems. And that
agreed.
Deeper reason is, while the physical movements or representations are very often extremely common,
mm-hmm.
the intention, the concept surrounding them, or the concept of application can be very different. And that's what separates the various systems one from the next.
Using sport karate as a medium here as an example, roundhouse, the difference between taekwondo and sport karate back in the 70s and 80s, punching to the head went away and kicking to the head was there. Okay, go ahead.
Be very specific. Which form of sport karate?
I'm going to say using the Ed Parker Long Beach International championships, because that's what my dad fought in and was a champion on. Because what he expressed is there was a point when the taekwondo guys broke away from everything because they did not like the fact that you had boxers learning a couple of punches and kicks through the Ed Parker methodology that were dominating the open tournament scene. So the taekwondo guys said, screw it, we're changing the rules and we're separating where you can't punch to the head. So there's that division. But then you go
Kyokushin, Shotokan.
Yep.
Very hard style karates.
Yep.
Very much a combative system.
Yep.
When you start looking at these different tournaments and fights with them, yes, technically the rules say in many Kyokushin tournaments, the rules absolutely say no punching to the head.
But they can sure lay into you with a kick to the head.
And there's such a difference between the representation of that from a karate stylist versus a Kyokushin stylist.
Absolutely. Just like the same difference between a sport taekwondo post-Olympic versus pre-Olympic, whereas the USTU rules was straight up take your head off with a roundhouse kick.
Right. And the same as, so I guess where I'm going with it is the specifics in all this matter of when you start, you can't say taekwondo, sport karate, because is it Kyokushin? Is it Shotokan? Is it Goju? Is it Kempo? Is it, which form of taekwondo is it?
Yep. And that's where the pre-verbal qualifiers are really important.
But that also leads to the same thing of why it's so important when we talk about Filipino systems of is it Pekiti Tirsia? Is it Modern Arnis? Is it Illustrissimo? Is it Balintawak? Is it, you fill in the blank? There's as many systems as there are tribes in the archipelago. Okay, so which one is it? Because that's going to dictate. For instance, I know what I'm going to say here. It could be whatever. I'm going to say it anyway. I'm going to submit to you that Pekiti Tirsia is formulated around the application of the Borong. Okay? That's what the shape and the similarities and commonalities of everything. Okay? If that is the intention, is the use of the Borong, and that's the intention behind Pekiti Tirsia, then while a different system may share some of the same movements and techniques, if their intention is to utilize the bolo, the Chris, I'm sorry, Pekiti Tirsia is not meant to be used by a Borong. It is the thing that is the sword. My mistake. I misspoke.
It's okay. It's all right.
That is the sword. Okay. For Pekiti Tirsia. If another system is trying to use a different blade, some of the movements may be the same, but the intention is different based on the root of what we're trying to do.
Yep.
As such, that's where the specificity matters, because how can we truly utilize or maximize the effectiveness of what we're trying to do if we don't specify I'm using a bolo, a Borong, a Ganunting, a Chris, fill in the blank. Whatever it is, that's what this is intended to use. And I would also say that most of the systems in the Philippines have that type of specificity of what their intention is to utilize. I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying that's what it is. And the more we understand that, the more we can understand what we're trying to do.
Mhm.
And that leads to how we should teach it.
Yep. But again, that goes.
And that's why lumping everything together
Mhm.
as FMA is misrepresenting severely what everybody is doing.
I
Because
agree with you. I agree.
Bobby Tabuada, Angel Cabales, and Leo Gahe Jr.
Mhm.
are doing extremely different things,
Mhm.
all at a very high level.
Mhm.
But they're extremely different. And to say that they're the same, or to even represent them as being the same,
Mhm.
is a disservice to everybody.
Agreed. And that's again going back to my original things about the titles of a lot of my videos. Is it FMA? Oh, let's define it. Is it FMA because I'm a Filipino man doing martial arts? Is it FMA because the stuff that I'm doing comes from the Philippines? Or is it FMA because I'm doing a specific Filipino methodology? It's all like the questions people ask. And specificity matters, quite honestly.
Do people ask that same question about other ethnicities, or is it just Filipinos?
It's just Filipinos. Straight up, it's just Filipinos. In my experience, yeah.
This is an honest question.
Yeah.
Why would anybody do anything like that? I mean, nobody's asking, is that Japanese martial arts?
A lot of it is.
Why? That seems extremely ignorant to me to ask those kind of questions based on an ethnic background.
What it is, and I want to get some heat on this, but the fact of the matter is, Filipinos have an identity crisis. What it is to be Filipino is such a difficult question to ask because the Philippines, they themselves, there we are, my buddy Peter. The fact is, Filipinos have an identity crisis. We don't know who we are in a lot of ways because this issue about decolonizing the mind. The Philippines has been invaded, colonized, and occupied for centuries. So when we talk about decolonization of the mind and our culture, the question is how far back do we want to go? Do we want to go away from the Americas, the Spaniards, the Chinese, the rest of the Indo-Malaysian archipelago? I mean, how far back do we want to go? As the fact is, the modern state of the Philippines, as an independent nation, is a conglomeration of thousands of tribes forced underneath a geopolitical modern structure, strongly tied to democracy and underneath the lens of Catholicism. So again, to be Filipino, we're still trying to define what it is to be Filipino, because of my brethren in the south, in Mindanao, the Moros, they have some very big opinions as to what it is to be Filipino, let alone even being named Filipino. So that is my view is the inherent issue is FMA has an identity crisis because Filipinos have an identity crisis, because there's also a big distinction between Filipinos back in the Philippines and the Phil-Am community. Because I was born in the Philippines and immigrated, but I was raised here in the States. So I am Filipino American, but immigrated first generation. But again, the definition of what is a Filipino is a deeper question that we as a people need to figure that out. And I don't think we ever will, to be honest. So
is it fair to say that while the question, what is a Filipino, may be difficult to answer based on what you're just saying, what is not difficult to answer is, I say, if I ask, what tribe are you?
Mm-hmm.
That is very easy for you to answer, isn't it?
Yep. Got to figure out, for one, the Filipino needs to figure out what tribe they're from, for one. Now, for a lot of us who are adoptees like myself, we got to figure that out too.
But do you know any Filipino in the archipelago or that's from the archipelago as a older person? Obviously, if they're an infant, that may be different. And if they're an infant that brought over, adopted, whatever, that may be different. But do you know any Filipino from the archipelago that when you ask them what tribe they're from, don't know what tribe they're from?
Yeah, there's a fair amount of them. Actually, talk
Is
about
there
older, like 50 and older, or 50 and younger.
30 and older?
30 and older, there's quite a few who don't know because they don't want to know. But there's also a lot of the old men who flat out know their lineage as to where they came from. Now, the question being is, do they say I'm Visayan, or I'm Ilocano, or I'm Cebuano, or Pampangan? It's varies person to person. But even further going back to like specific tribes, I don't know. That's person to person.
I mean, to say that the Philippines is under
Yeah.
Catholicism is almost, I would think, a concession to being colonized by Spain.
Absolutely is. Absolutely is. I get a lot of crap for it because I'm not a Catholic. So,
Well,
yeah.
look at what the Moros are so commonly down in the South.
Yeah.
They're not Catholic either.
No, but they're still Filipinos, but they don't want to be Filipino. Yeah.
Yeah. So it does go back to that question, to me anyway.
Yep.
And it just, I think we're doing it a disservice. I think we're doing it a disservice to call it Filipino martial arts, because it's not. Because anybody, if you've seen Balintawak and you've seen Pekiti Tirsia,
completely two different energies.
They're not the same. They're not the same.
Nope, they're not.
Even though they're from the same country, they're not the same.
Yep. Even the same region.
Okay.
Island region, I should say, the Visayas.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
but
Sure.
different. Very, very different.
Absolutely. But yeah, I think to do our students and the systems proper service, we must represent the systems that we teach as truthfully as we're able to, which also requires us to show, I mean, given the history of the Philippines, without being a Filipino history expert, I cannot imagine that there would be a combat system that would come from that region that's not based in actual combat.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you? Is that a fair assumption?
Oh, that's absolutely fair. Because the fact is, so here, to use another analogy, because I use this often when talking about like the generalization of the Philippines as a modern Filipino, we generalize the indigenous American tribes as a single cultural group, when the fact of the matter is they are not a unified nation. Each individual indigenous American tribe is unique to themselves, but we generalize them because that's what humans do. So with that, the question being is, do they have a unified fighting methodology? The answer is no. But what's unified is they all did a fair amount of tribal warfare, and the things that work no matter what. So,
and let's not forget, history is written by the victor.
That is correct. So again, this is that tricky part about truth comes from combat, because people learned how to fucking fight before they learned how to farm. They just did. And when we go back far enough and actually have that honest conversation about what we're actually training and preparing for, and having that honest conversation with ourselves, we have to be so specific. And honestly, a lot of people don't have that critical thinking capability and say, hey, specific and honest to myself, let alone know what they're looking at, and better yet, how it's presented to them by their instructors, let alone the instructor having the integrity of that experience and to be able to express all that in a manner that makes sense. On top of all that, actually be able to do the stuff. So, and this is where like can
you do me a favor, please?
Sir. Yes, sir.
Can you please type that out, what you just stated, on how to select and identify an effective instructor, and we can put that all over the internet, because you're 100% correct. That's exactly the point that everyone needs to keep in mind.
I can do that. I'll do that once I get the transcript, and I will definitely make a post about it.
Thank you very much. That is
It is
outstanding.
on my mind constantly. Because here's the other one: military. Period. We just went through 20 years of war, and we're about to go to war again. Splitting hairs, but the fact is we're about to go to war again. We got really good at war. We got
What's the closest army base to you?
Jaber. So Fort
Okay,
Richardson.
go to Fort Richardson and just walk around sometime.
Oh yeah, I got to go up there anyway.
And then think about what you're about to say.
Yeah.
Okay?
But my point being is, we spent 20 years at war, learning how to do war really well, and better yet, being able how to teach it. Because the fact of the matter is, as soldiers, we became really great instructors. Because 20 years of war had a lot of experience, and we had to change the approach at the speed of war, and on top of all that approach had to be change the approach of how we teach things at the speed of war.
We were rewriting doctrine as we were performing it.
Yep. So we were really good at that. As the things of all things, what a veteran does is that they are a teacher, and especially if they're a non-commissioned officer, you're a teacher, you're an instructor, because the fact is the cost of it is in lives. So you have to be really fucking good at what you do and express that. And the best way to define whether or not this person is a good instructor is let's look at the great instructors that come out of the military. And there is a lot of commonality in between those. Like what I was expressing about how to look for a good martial arts instructor, look for a good military instructor, and a lot of those things overlap. So I don't know. That's just my viewpoint.
You're not wrong, because the essence of what you're saying is combat is combat.
Mm-hmm. Really is.
And that's in a lot of ways what this boils down to. Is combat is combat, and you're absolutely right. And at the same time, things are changing. What we deal with on the street is changing. In America, I don't know if you saw it or not. Earlier this week, there's a video on the news down here. 5 guys storming a house, trying to clear the house. Trying.
Yeah.
Luckily, the homeowners weren't there.
Yeah.
But just the fact that they were doing these techniques and trying to make them up changes what a home invasion looks like. 2 weeks ago, right here where I'm at, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, just a couple miles from me, in the middle of the day, a guy was at his house at a farm, had somebody drive up in a truck in his driveway, call him over to the truck as if he wanted to talk to him, whatever, which is not completely uncommon out here. People get lost or they're whatever, and they're trying to find something, and so they want to ask directions or whatever else. Whenever he called him over, he had a pistol and a shotgun in his truck, and he stuck the shotgun in the guy's face, told him he was running from the cartel and needed money, and tried to rob him at gunpoint, standing in his own driveway. Things are changing significantly of what we deal with, what we see, how we see things, what we have to deal with now. And the more we can keep up on what it is that we're actually having to deal with, and the more we can present that in a realistic manner, the better we're going to be in dealing with everything.
And this is the part of the education of, to understand who the enemy is, we have to know what the enemy does and the means and methods of training and their goals and their outcome. Yeah, it's a lot. Martial arts is way more than just punching and kicking. Punching and kicking is just the smallest part of it. But it's the punching and kicking and the flashy videos is what sells, when the fact is the work is the real side that we're actually, a lot of people are just deficient on, because it's work. Just is.
So it's something that I think we really need to focus on.
Mhm.
And I think if we do, it will change what we present and how we present things.
Agreed. And this is where the opportunity of what this podcast does is allow us by mission and creed is have candid conversations about martial arts violence in life because it all ties together. And so more and more that we have conversations like this, it helps create a sense of change, perspective, and also documents these things so we can actually be part of the change and not perpetuate the crap that is so consistently that we see out there. So, and I applaud you for being part of that change and also taking the time to say your piece about this and also taking the risk of presenting yourself at the behest of the internet. So this is what leadership is. The fact of the matter is leadership is the willingness to sacrifice and display fault and display opinion based upon experiences. Because everybody wants to be a leader, but they don't know what it is to be a leader.
I can tell you that I can recognize what needs to happen to be effective at what we're all trying to do.
Yep.
I can also tell you that I'm constantly learning how to represent that and how to pass that on.
Mhm.
So it's by no means do I have all the answers. I'm just learning some of the correct questions. So it's always crazy here.
It's all right. Well, we're getting close to 2.5 hours.
Yep.
This has been a great conversation. I would love to
I
have
really-
you on. Yep.
Number one, I just want to tell you, I really appreciate you having me on and having the conversation. And anytime.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stay safe. Enjoy your life in all things. Enjoy those dogs because, I mean, they're our babies. I totally understand that. But yeah, thank you, Brother Court. I appreciate everything that you do, the time that you spent with us. And yeah, I'll have you back on. I'm going to drop you down, do our outro, and yeah, we'll call it a day.
Thank you, sir. Be
Thank
safe.
you.
Talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, that was Guro Court Bolton. We had a great conversation. I hope everybody got a chance to watch it. If not, you can see the replay. Things coming up. I don't know who we have coming up next because Brian and I are still trying to figure that out. But tomorrow, who do I got coming on? I am talking to my good friend, or becoming good friends, a man that I really appreciate in the FMA community. I am talking once again to Guro Jesse Santiago from FMA Pulse. That's going to be on sometime tomorrow. You can look for the flyer online. Oh no, that's the wrong flyer. But yeah, so I'll throw in the show notes. I also have a great conversation coming up with Mark Medieros, talk about combat sports and FMA. So yeah, we have a lot of stuff coming. But again, thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for hanging out with Guro Court because he said some really profound and interesting things. We need to have more of these hard conversations. So yeah, everybody have a wonderful evening, and I will catch everybody later. Bye.